Hey everyone, Jeff Martins here, and we want to welcome you to our Southridge online message. If this is your first time tuning in with us, a special welcome to you. We're glad that you're interested in what we're up to together as we seek to follow Jesus in our community and share his love with others. If you're part of our community but are catching up online, maybe because you weren't able to join us on Sunday, or maybe it's been a while since you've come to one of our services, we want you to know that we miss you. But we're grateful that we can all benefit from and participate in what we're learning together through our weekly messages in this format. For any and all of us, when and as you're able, we invite you to consider joining us on Sunday mornings in either our Vineland or Welland or here at our St. Catharines location, because there's something life-giving about experiencing and sharing the love of Jesus when we get together as a community. If you'd like to connect with us further this week, we invite you to fill out our online Connect card, or if you're interested in joining a group, volunteering to serve, exploring spiritual practices, maybe taking a step towards baptism, or perhaps contributing financially, you can do and find all of that stuff through our website as well. Most of all today, we hope you know you are welcome, you are loved, and we pray that Jesus speaks something meaningful to your heart and life this week through this week's message. Let's check it out together.
Man, the Bible is really weird sometimes, am I right? I mean, we come here to worship God and learn how to follow Jesus and be spiritual family to each other. And if that's not weird enough, the Bible throws dragons and beasts at us. I mean, as we continue into the weird world of Revelation, passages like this can make the Bible seem out of step with reality. But as we're going to see today, I believe that this passage, the real challenge we're going to have is with how real and relevant it is to our everyday lives. But in order to get there, we have to start by engaging the text on its own terms. So let's dive in. First, as some background, the word beasts first appears in the Bible on the very first page, on a day when two very different creatures are created, the divine image-bearing humans and the beasts of the earth. Now, your Bibles might say animals, but the original Hebrew is beasts. Now, God tells the humans to rule over the beasts, but almost immediately they are led astray by one of them, that crafty serpent. And after that, sin is described as a beast crouching, lying in wait to attack us. And biblical authors pick up that theme and use beast language to describe kind of all world forces that oppose God and incite human sin and rebellion. Like how God warns the prophet Jeremiah of the coming invasion of the empire of Babylon, led by King Nebuchadnezzar. He says, "A lion, a beast, has come out of his lair. A destroyer of nations has set out to lay waste to your land." After this happens, Nebuchadnezzar swells with pride and begins to see himself as a god. And so God says to him, "Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen." Now, what's the point of this little history lesson? Well, the idea here is that biblically, humanity was created to reflect and rule as God's image on earth. And yet, when we begin to act as if we are God, we become like the very beasts we were made to rule over. Now, incidentally, in the original Hebrew, Genesis 1 also speaks of a sea monster, that serpent-like devilish dragon we met last week in Revelation chapter 12, that was revealed as an already defeated foe, hurled down from heaven, and yet still wreaking havoc as it thrashes and flails its way to certain doom. Already vanquished by Jesus at the cross, all it can do now is lead humanity astray. And its primary vehicle for doing that, as we'll see in chapter 13, is these two beasts. Now, the first beast crawls out of the sea, which we've said many times is a biblical image for chaos and evil. Incidentally, this beast is the character that some people refer to as the Antichrist, which is a term that never appears in the book of Revelation. Now, John, in another letter he wrote, does refer to all who oppose Jesus as antichrists, but a single solitary apocalyptic figure known as the Antichrist is not a biblical idea. This beast is described by John as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and it looks like a lion, a leopard, and a bear. Oh my. Actually, this is an image drawn directly out of the Old Testament book of Daniel, where Daniel dreams of 4 beasts crawling out of the sea, one that looks like a lion, one like a leopard, one like a bear, and then one that has 10 horns. In Daniel, these 4 beasts are said to represent 4 empires or kingdoms that oppose God and enslave God's people. The Empire of Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, and the Greeks. But here, John has combined all 4 of these beasts into one super mega beast, depicting not just another empire, but empire itself. Now still, this image of a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns would have rang a few bells for John's original readers. You see, Rome, still known to this day as the city of 7 hills, was founded when the heads or rulers of 7 hill towns merged to form an empire. In fact, later in Revelation, John will refer to the 7 heads directly as 7 hills. The 10 horns represent royal power. Think of the way an animal's horns can kind of look like a crown. In Daniel, the 10 horns were 10 kings, but here John seems to be repurposing them as the 10 emperors who had ruled over Rome up until that point. Now, all the creative imagery aside, John is clearly talking about Rome here, and he seems to have one particular Roman emperor in mind. As he writes, one of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. At the age of 30, having lost all public support and declared a threat by the Senate, Emperor Nero stabbed himself in the head with a sword and died. Now, his body was kept hidden, which fueled speculations about his death and led to legends that Nero would one day return and reclaim his throne. And while several imposters used this legend to try to grab at power, the real Nero, of course, never returned. John's fatally head-wounded ruler is a reference to the Nero legend, which itself is a poor parody of the story of the ruler of the cosmos, Jesus, who was crucified and yet resurrected. So the first beast is Rome, but it's more than Rome, actually. It is the spirit of empire itself. All the anti-Jesus systems and structures that use power and violence to dominate and destroy and dehumanize us, promising peace and prosperity, but only for those who will bow the knee. We see empire alive today in the so-called superpowers who claim global supremacy by trampling on ordinary people, demanding loyalty to corrupt political and economic systems using fear, intimidation, manipulation, and control. But we also see smaller, more local expressions of empire. In the boss who runs her company like a tyrant, or the spouse or parent who acts like a dictator, the friend who's a bully, or the church leader who uses their spiritual authority to try to control people. We see empire anywhere power is wielded to compel loyalty and allegiance to anything or anyone other than Jesus. And yet John tells us that empire itself is only a symptom of a far greater problem, an earthly expression of the true cosmic evil. He writes that it's the dragon that gave the beast its power and its throne and great authority. John is saying that even despite its beastly behavior, empires like Rome are only ever puppets, pawns controlled by that already defeated yet still very dangerous dragon who wants nothing less than our worship. John continues saying that people worship the dragon because he'd given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. John depicts empire here as an artificially propped up false god, empowered and employed by the dragon in a cosmic battle for our worship and devotion, competing for our loyalty and allegiance. Its only aim is to conquer us, either by violence or, more often, by enticing us to align ourselves with its values and ideals, drawing us into a lifestyle that's totally incompatible with following Jesus, luring us with comfort, pleasure, and security so that we'll welcome its rule rather than resist it, enslaving us to its luxuries until we can't even imagine our lives without it. But John leaves us with hope in the form of the 42 months, which isn't a literal timeline, but actually a literary tool John uses. See, throughout Revelation, John uses numbers to create little word puzzles for us to solve. And if you look closely, a very clear pattern begins to emerge. In chapter 11, it was the 3.5 days. In chapter 12, it was the 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. And here it's 42 months, which again is 3.5 years. You can do the math later. In each case, this describes a time period governed by evil. And the significance of the 3.5 is that it's half of 7, which is the Bible's number for completeness. This is John's way of depicting incompleteness, a limited and finite time when evil rules the world. You see, Rome may describe itself as the eternal city, but no empire lasts forever. Its reign of terror, just like the dragon we saw last week, is limited, and it will come to an end. This is John's way of offering hope that this too shall pass. And in the meantime, he urges Jesus' people to be patient, reciting a poem from the prophet Jeremiah that says, if anyone is to go into captivity they will go. And if anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. Originally, this poem was used to describe Israel going into captivity by the Babylonian Empire, but here John has repurposed it to describe their captivity to the Roman Empire, suggesting that what they are currently experiencing is not going to come to an end anytime soon, which is why he says that this is a call for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Now, if one beast isn't enough, a second now emerges, this time not from the sea, but from out of the ground, which is language reminiscent of the creation of humanity, who were formed out of the dust of the ground. And at first glance, this second beast is actually almost kind of attractive in appearance, one we might even be a little bit drawn to, because John describes it as looking like a lamb, the very image he has used to describe Jesus throughout Revelation. And yet, as we're going to see, this, like so many appearances, is deceiving. John writes that it had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. John says, despite its almost Christ-like surface appearance, this beast is pure dragon. It is a megaphone for the dragon, spewing and churning out misleading propaganda in support of empire. And what it does next will be eerily familiar if you've read the Old Testament book of Daniel, in which King Nebuchadnezzar sets up a statue of himself, an image, and then forces everyone, including the Jewish captives, to bow down to it and worship him, saying that if anyone refuses, they will be killed. Borrowing this story, John echoes this in what the beast does. He says the second beast ordered them to set up an image to honor the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived, remember the Nero legend, and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. If the first beast was the spirit of empire, this second beast is religious imperialism, institutional religion that uses its spiritual influence over people to coerce allegiance to and worship of empire. Now, John is most likely thinking about the Jewish synagogue and its leaders of his day who used their spiritual influence to side with Rome in order to get Jesus and many of his first followers killed. But if you've ever seen religion, maybe even with a kind of Jesus-like surface appearance, mixing faith and spiritual influence with empire-like power in order to advance political agendas and leaders, then you may have a sense of what John is talking about here. He continues saying that this beast also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. That number is 666. Well, if you've been patiently waiting, we have finally arrived at the mark of the beast, 666. And if you were raised religious like I was, you've probably heard, hundreds of theories, from literal birthmarks on the foreheads of certain world leaders to microchips and barcodes implanted in our wrists. But what John is clearly doing here is giving us another number puzzle, a puzzle that he suggests we can solve using ordinary mathematics. He says, let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, which is the number of its name, he says. You see, in the Jewish and Greek world of John's day, they didn't use numbers per se. Instead, all the letters of the alphabet were assigned a corresponding numerical value. Think Roman numerals, X, V, C, I. As such, all words and names had a corresponding number associated with them. In the Jewish world, this was called gematria, and in Greek, it's called isopsephy. And in Jewish gematria, the name Kaiser Neron, or Caesar Nero, adds up to, you guessed it, 666. Actually, interestingly, some of the earliest manuscripts of Revelation that we have actually show this number as 616, which is a little less scary. But that's because in Greek isopsephy, Kaiser Nero adds up to 616. So John is clearly referring to Nero here, the anti-Jesus emperor who demanded loyalty and worship in order to have the right to buy and sell within the empire. Now, interestingly, in the phrase mark of the beast, the word mark here is probably better translated inscription, and likely refers to the coins, the inscription of Nero's name and image on the coins that were used in the Roman marketplace. So what's going on here? I mean, Nero by this point was long dead and gone, and he wasn't coming back. And I suppose that might have made it easier for John to denounce him than to speak negatively about the current living emperor, Domitian. But what we've got to appreciate here is that just like with the first beast that was Rome, but it was more than Rome, it was actually the spirit of empire itself, 666 isn't a reference to just an individual named Nero or a certain Roman coin. It's a reference to all economic systems and structures that reinforce loyalty to empire by enslaving us with every transaction and trade, creating a world where you can't make or spend a buck without paying tribute to Caesar. So that's why the mark is placed on their right hands or on their foreheads. John here is reminding us of the Shema prayer we prayed earlier, that pledge of allegiance to love God with all our heart, mind, and strength. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, where that prayer comes from, God instructs the people to write the Shema on the door frames of their houses to remind them to love God in all their comings and goings. But he also tells them to tie them as the words of the prayer as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads as a way of reminding the people to love God with every thought and every action. Maybe you've seen some strict adherents of Judaism wearing the leather straps around their wrists and the phylacteries by their foreheads, which are little leather boxes that contain a tiny scroll with the Shema prayer written on it. You see, John's 666 is not about literal markings on people's bodies. It's far more serious and sinister than that. John presents 666 as an anti-Shema, describing the way our lives are marked in thought and action with loyalty to the Neros of our world, to empire and ultimately the dragon. He's describing our over-reliance on the systems and powers that be, that it is reinforced daily through all of our mindless and almost ritualistic participation in the commerce of empire, all our buying and selling as we buy into the American or Canadian dream and sell our souls just to keep up with the Joneses. rather than keeping step with Jesus. You see, Revelation 13 isn't just a fairy tale about dragons and beasts. Its weird imagery offers a piercing insight with clarity into our day-to-day lives in the world in which we live, and how effortlessly and thoughtlessly we compromise our loyalty to Jesus and align ourselves with empire by simply going with the flow, cruising through life, buying and selling and producing and consuming, and buying into the idea that money, pleasure, and power make the world go round. You see, 666 isn't a superstitious warning against birthmarks and barcodes. It's a revelation of the way that our lives are already marked by the beast in every transaction and trade we make. How, with all our side hustles, we're the ones getting hustled. How we invest so much in building our businesses that we forget to be about our Father's business. We play the markets because we think we can beat the system, but end up getting played because that's how the system sucks us in. And our spending habits get determined by marketing firms more than missional focus, making us complicit in global corruption, even if we don't know the names of the people, even children, who are represented by the tags on our t-shirts that say made in somewhere with no human rights laws. These are the rituals and practices of empire worship, of the worship of the beast. And if you don't think you worship the beast, consider this. Worship isn't the songs we sing on Sundays, it's the lives we live all week. And the more in line and invested in the interests of empire we are, the more they begin to shape who we are becoming. See, that's the whole lie of empire. That's the trick of beast worship, is that it turns us into beasts, desensitizing and dehumanizing us, distorting the image of God in us, until we begin to resemble more the image of the false gods of our world, the Nebuchadnezzars and Neros. You see, that's the real fairy tale being exposed here in Revelation 13. And it should force us to ask ourselves some pretty tough questions about where our allegiance lies. You know, who or what has our loyalty? We may not write Bible verses on the doors of our houses or wear phylacteries, but what do our home decor and fashion choices say about who or what we worship? We might not recite the Shema twice a day, but consider our near religious devotion to our devices, how they're practically glued to our hands and foreheads, demanding loyalty to every notification, rewiring our thought patterns and our behaviors. You know, consider how easy it is to set up automated giving for, say, new car payments or streaming services, but how hard it is to set it up for regular tithing to the church. Or how we order our lives around comfort and convenience rather than selflessness and sacrifice. If this is making you a little uncomfortable, join the club. The three things you're not really supposed to talk about publicly are religion, politics, and money, and John is forcing us to stare at all three, because together the dragon and the two beasts represent an unholy trinity, enticing us with promises of economic, political, and even religious security into a lifestyle, an anti-Shema lifestyle of loyalty to all that opposes Jesus. See, Revelation 13 wasn't written to unmask the identity of Antichrist or the mark of the beast. It was written to expose all of the anti-Jesus ways our lives are already marked in every transaction and trade that we make. If you still don't think you're affected, consider how you or any of us would respond if Jesus were to ask us, like he once did to a wealthy young influencer, to go sell all our possessions and give the proceeds to the poor and follow him. How would any of us respond? In the story, the young man walks away, and I see in his footsteps a reflection of myself, because the world just seems to have its hooks in me. I think this is why Jesus says that the poor, those unafflicted by affluence, live so much closer to the kingdom of heaven than many of us. Well, if that's true, then how do we disentangle ourselves from empire? How do we live in the world but not like it? Should we all go live like monks in caves? Some have tried, but I actually think Jesus is inviting us into something far more revolutionary than that. You see, biblically, the key to living in empire while remaining loyal to Jesus is all about living more like exiles than emperors. Living more like exiles than emperors, like citizens of another kingdom. Theology professor Daniel Smith Christopher says that this is all about a practice of radical doubt towards the self-proclaimed power and religion of the empire. It is rooted in a conviction that God's covenant people, the church, are the primary vehicle of God's work in the world, and that the nation state is not the center of the universe. Imagine how our lives would be different if we lived with a baseline suspicion of politics and of the prospect of an economic upturn just around the corner, or even of the charismatic talents of religious leaders. What if we weren't so shaken when they all inevitably let us down, because our hope is fixed to an unshakable kingdom, led by a slain lamb who has already died to overcome the world and its dragons and beasts? What if, in following Jesus, we could begin to increasingly order our lives around things that can't be taxed, touched, or taken away by empire, that can't be monetized, bought, or sold, but represent life's true wealth? Things like love and joy and peace and kindness, community, and service to the poor. What if we could obey that original calling of humanity to rule over the beasts rather than letting them rule us and lead us astray? Finding creative ways to practice peaceful resistance to empire while deepening our devotion and discipleship to Jesus. Things like intentionally downsizing or downgrading our current lifestyle in order to help upgrade the quality of life of the poor, the lonely, the weak, and unwell. Or maybe redirecting some of the long hours we put in at work towards volunteering to serve others. Or maybe spending a little less time on news and politics and more time on our knees in prayer. Or consider how, given Canada's unique tax laws, financially tithing to the church regularly is actually a way of paying less tribute to Caesar in the form of taxes, and a way at the same time of driving our discipleship towards God. Now, how could we get really creative in learning how to disentangle ourselves from the machine of empire while driving our love and devotion to Jesus? We began by talking about how weird the Bible can be sometimes, and certainly it can be. But the more time I've spent in Revelation 13, the thing that I've been reflecting on is how what's really weird is how normal empire has become to me. How I've normalized the worship of the beast. How, despite my claims to follow Jesus, my day-to-day lifestyle isn't a whole lot different than some of my friends who don't make that claim. I mean, how weird and bizarre is it that we come here week in and week out to worship God and learn to follow Jesus and then bow the knee to empire for the rest of the week? Some may look at Revelation 13 and think it's just a fairy tale. But the question I've been wrestling with is, when I look at my own life of faith, is that the real fairy tale? Is it a fiction I've been living that hasn't really crossed over into the reality of my day-to-day life, driving me to love God with all my heart and mind and strength? Because that's the kind of devotion and worship and love and loyalty and allegiance that I want my life to be defined by. And if you do too, as the band comes to lead us in a song of response, I want to invite us to say the Shema prayer together one last time this morning. If you're willing and able, can you stand together with me and let's say this prayer together. Hear, O people, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind and with all your strength. God, would you make this prayer true of us, we pray. Amen.